Now, how's this for an interesting coincidence? In the 1990s, when Barney the Dinosaur was popular, there was a demographic of people outside of the regular demographic of very small children who absolutely hated it. I just found out about this recently and it doesn't surprise me. But I thought it would be fun to go into the question, why Barney? Was it just like bad timing for something like that, or what? As somebody who was actually a big Barney fan at some point, I'm curious on the subject. Well, the PBS program had been canceled since 2010 and just recently made an announcement for a CGI reboot to come out sometime around 2024 to be co-produced by the toy company Mattel. Barney was like the king of the hill to Sesame Street's The Simpsons. Barney was actually produced in Texas, where King of the Hill takes place, and both shows initially ended in 2010, only to inevitably be revived one day, like everything else. And as I did a little nostalgic research, it did not take long for me to find out about the documentary. Released on the Peacock app last year was a 2-hour documentary talking about the history of Barney. They interviewed people who worked on the show and talked about the creator, Cheryl Leach. But the majority of it was about the negative impact Barney had on society and the fact that it became the thing everyone loved to hate.
I hate him with a passion.
Now, in the early 90s, Barney and Friends would air on PBS for the small children on the same network that had shows like Sesame Street and Mr. Rogers. But the same group of people who watched Sesame Street and Mr. Rogers as kids would now be adults, looking at Barney as if it didn't belong, as if it was leaving a stain on their own childhood. Now, it's normal to grow out of something and now want to avoid the one thing that you was completely obsessed with at one point. It's also normal to dislike something new that gets overexposure. Like if a TV show or a celebrity keeps getting brought up and you start to feel like it's overrated and annoyed at its existence. You find other people who feel the same way, and soon this overexposed thing becomes cool to hate on. The internet over the years have made doing this a lot easier. You have meme culture constantly poking fun at everything. It's cool to be sarcastic and snarky in the right context. It's cool to go against the grain sometimes, and this has really always been a thing. It's nothing new. It comes in many forms, but this is all a part of counterculture, defined as the culture and lifestyle of those who reject and oppose the dominant values and behaviors of society. There were certain times in history where this counterculture really spiked and became noticeable. Like you could say that Elvis in the 50s was one of the first examples of modern anti-mainstream entertainment in terms of just being something different that your parents wouldn't approve of. But the big modern counterculture spike was in the 1960s. You had the anti-war, sexual liberation hippie culture, and it really kind of created the whole baseline of counterculture for decades to come. The 60s would even take chances with their TV shows by showcasing families who were just a little bit different than the normal family. The Addams Family was counterculture by definition. In the 1980s, counterculture spiked by becoming more physical. You had a rise in tattoos, piercings, rebellious hairstyles, and the culture also became more violent. You saw it in the movies, and you could feel it in the music. And things like MTV would act as a direct line for all things edgy and cool. Going into the 90s, music would grow and become even more influential on the youth, and even animation was getting edgier around this time. With the rise of these edgy cartoons, music videos, rap music, etc., the anti-mainstream culture had itself become mainstream in a way, reaching out to all of the youth with the help of cable TV. Now, even with the impact of cable and all of its craziness, you'd still have the safe reliability of those old channels you didn't have to pay for, like PBS. And knowing that shows like Sesame Street was still going on would be comforting in this rapidly changing world. So it's the 90s, and on one side you had the edgy new counterculture, and on the other side you had the softer nostalgia of the 50s, 60s, and 70s. The stuff on TV during those times were the shows that made sense. The characters, the story, the whole premise was safe and easy to follow. and easy to digest. The counterculture displayed on TV didn't have to make much sense, but it was understood that it had to be thought-provokingly anti-normal. It didn't have to be believable, it just needed to be relatable and entertaining. One of the most popular TV shows in the 90s, Seinfeld, was counterculture. It was a show about nothing in particular, but the characters were so kooky and anti. They were flawed, relatable, and believable, and that was the key to most counterculture on TV. Characters having a flawed relatability is really just connected to good writing, and has always been appreciated as good, respectable entertainment. As human beings, we want to see characters we can relate to. Even in content made for children, like Blue's Clues on Nick Jr., kids would see a somewhat realistic world from a child's perspective, letting them know from an early age about problem solving and understanding that this world is full of problems. But what came up right at the dawn of this polarizing field of 90s entertainment was the PBS program Barney and Friends. Overall lasting from 1992 to 2010, Barney's peak popularity in the 90s was apparently overshadowed by counterculture's hatred for it. Barney's whole image was like, don't worry, be happy, everybody's special, and Barney loves everyone. It was like a glorified babysitting fantasy of a traditional parent who knows that their son really likes dinosaurs. And this was pretty much how the Barney creator came up with the idea in the first place. Character design is important, and Barney, along with his amazing friends Baby Bop and BJ, had these big, soft, brightly colored animal suits who always seemed to be in a good mood. And although many small children loved them, these Barney characters made for an easy target for literally anyone outside of its 2 to 7 demographic. There was really nothing at all really edgy or relatable with these costumed characters. The use of happy dinosaurs would prove to be more unbelievable than monsters with human characteristics. So the counterculture-loving youth and those who preferred Sesame Street and Muppets would pick on Barney, while the aging old school and those who grew up on more realistic programs like Mr. Rogers would find Barney just different enough to be safe for their kids and grandkids. But people of all ages would find a reason to hate Barney. Even the parents who had small kids who loved Barney would grow to hate the character because the TV show was super repetitive and cheesy. Like if you had a household with only one TV set or one VHS player, which was a lot of households back then, you would be forced to watch Barney at some point with your kid. And this could quickly become irritating for any adult to have to sit through. Today, it's the complete opposite. Your kid could have their own tablet, their own TV, in their own room somewhere, streaming whatever goofy kids program that they want. But Barney wasn't the only kids show that would be annoying to watch as an adult, but it was the only one really having this everything's perfect and wonderful approach in a time where all the other shows was proving that everything is not all perfect and wonderful. Long-running kids program Sesame Street would use fantasy by including characters who were monsters, and then you had Big Bird and other characters who were supposed to be human. None of them were dinosaurs though, and all the puppets and costume characters would feature layered personalities, and some were quite flawed. Even Elmo would get annoyed sometimes. Sesame Street is very genius in their approach because they show that everything is not butterflies and rainbows, and some people are literally homeless, but it's important to try to understand and be friendly to those who are different. Barney's appeal was very surface level, and those people feeling like Barney was trying to replace the more seasoned and educational Sesame Street was in their right to feel some kind of way. But as the Barney documentary has shown, the hatred for Barney and everyone involved had gotten out of control, and the blow-up of email and internet culture would only enhance the negativity. One of the first ever websites apparently was a Barney hate site. But this in itself was counterculture naturally doing its thing. It was cool and funny to hate Barney because Barney was incorruptible, apparently. Always in a good mood, always the one with all the answers. If you look back on 90s culture, grunge, gangster rap, primetime cop dramas were starting to cuss, Barney really didn't fit in this culture at all. It probably would have done better in the era of HR Puffin-Stuff and the Banana Splits, but even they were goofy, flawed children's characters. You can really bring up any wholesome children's character, and you can see that they are actually well-written three-dimensional characters. Donald Duck gets mad sometimes, and he talks weird. Same with Goofy. Mickey has a girlfriend, and sometimes they have disagreements. Designing a believable, relatable character is just basic good writing. It's important to create characters in a world that balances them out. If the characters are going to come off as happy and flawless 100% of the time, there needs to be something or someone else to contrast their personality, to make the story more balanced. In society as a whole, it's healthy to be balanced. Good and evil are both necessary, but you can't be too far on either end of that spectrum, because then you'll have a problem. And because balance in society is necessary, counterculture is necessary. Counterculture sparks new ideas and healthy rebellion. It breeds art. The 1960s brought us some of the best music ever made, period. And it all stemmed from counterculture's healthy rebellion. And in that same light of the 60s, I believe that counterculture brought balance and made the world a better place. Basically, with the way human nature and society works, we don't want to be fed lies in a fantasy world that we can't relate to. There needs to be a connection to whatever TV show or song that we engage with. And whether people realize it or not, they are looking for a sweet spot on the spectrum between realism and total fantasy, at least when it comes to their entertainment. And when you compare something like Barney the Dinosaur to Kermit the Frog, people are going to prefer Kermit the Frog over Barney. Kermit is the perfect character mix of fantasy and realism. You can find an unlimited number of imperfect characters in comic book media, and these are probably the best examples. A lot of people's favorite fictional characters are flawed, problematic comic book characters with morals. Why do you think the Hulk is so popular? You have the anti-hero, something that has been embraced more and more through the 2000s and 2010s. The bad boy with a good heart, the femme fatale. All these flawed character traits draw real people in. What people don't want to see is a one-dimensional, cute and cuddly character unless something bad happens to them. We crave conflict. But it's not like a world without Barney and everything Barney stands for would be better. People hated on Barney, but I feel like the overall message that it had was important. If nothing else, it's good to know that despite how anti and negative society seems to be, there is always that one little spark of pure positivity. Even if we think it's insincere, one positive interaction on a bad day is something we all need at some point. Barney was also necessary because it allowed for an artistic, fair use expression of hatred, which also gave people something to laugh at. It was only a matter of time before they would find some way to bring Barney back, and I feel like the early 2020s would be a good time to do it. He's going to come back as a cartoon, and given how he's owned by a toy company, they're doing it to sell toys. But I feel like that message Barney had of love and acceptance is needed in this new generation of young kids who are more exposed to negativity and trauma more than ever. The Barney documentary showed that Barney had a negative, real-life impact, even outside the anti-Barney humor. It mostly affected the people who were directly involved with the production. The kids who were known for being on the show grew up through their teenage years feeling like they had to prove that they wasn't still the same kid who hugged Barney and sang songs with him back in the 90s. As adults, most of them would balance out, but it's still kinda creepy how after a person grows up in the light of goodness and purity, they often step into the darkness of impurity down the road. This all proves that a person is most comfortable with the middle ground between good and evil when it comes to their entertainment and fictional characters. They themselves could be an all-around good person, but their favorite character might be the Joker. It's all about balance, the yin and yang within oneself. You can't hate something so much that it becomes part of your personality, but also you can't be so pure and naive that you don't see the real-life dangers all around you. And no one's perfect, even though it might be nice to think that somebody out there actually is. Well, now I feel like I'm rambling. Watch the Barney documentary, and I'll see you next time.